1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Thank you. Is there any table group that is dying to share one of the experiences that was shared at your table? And I didn't give you a whole lot of time, but we're running a little bit behind. And we just have 1 or 2 people to share out. Okay. And so that's a different way of interacting with the text, and that's one thing that is very helpful for our students because it helps them to focus on that, and you're just doing it one sentence at a time. And very often, how many of you have ever, remember being in the classroom yourselves, and you walk into a classroom and you were given a textbook that was like that thick? And then you were in college and they gave you like 10 or 12 textbooks that were about that thick, and you had to read one every other day. Okay, so that same feeling of being overwhelmed by text is what our students experience on a daily basis. So that's one of the reasons why I really wanted you, when I heard you discussing that, I think it's remarkable. They're not going to master a whole paragraph or a whole page or a whole book of text unless they have conquered the building foundational piece of the text, which is the sentence. Okay? Thank you. Anybody else? It could be something unique, new, like this idea, or any of the other strategies that we've used. Let's do it this way. How many of you have started using the must always speak in complete sentences? Raise your hand. Have tried it, at least tried it. Okay. How about the response sentences that are on the poster? And I see the posters all over the school. Okay. All right. So we're off to a good start on those things. And then how about the partnering? I had we had hoped to have a video of a first grade class at Cedar Creek Elementary during their joint sharing science time. It's a bilingual first grade and a regular English first grade group. And they regularly get together during science time. And to see those little first graders using the 4 L's. The teachers called me into their classroom so that I could observe. And fortunately, the AP had already taken video of those students. But they tweaked it a little bit. They have the students on the floor as they're talking about an experiment that they just completed together. And so they're facing each other on the floor and they're holding hands. It is the sweetest thing. And they are speaking in complete sentences, and they're using the word banks that their teachers have provided for them, and they're using that academic language. But we had a lot of trouble downloading it. We're hopefully, we'll have it enabled for you to see on the iDrive whenever we work the kinks out of it. So, but these are first graders, and it's about intentionally and purposefully establishing that expectation. You must follow these rules when you are interacting with a partner. You have to look at them, you have to listen to them, and they were paraphrasing what the other one had said. Just an amazing video. And we'll show it to you as soon as we get it. Okay. So then we're going to move on. No, we didn't have that. And then the other thing that we wanted to review is the samples of the language objectives that we spoke about the last time that we were with you, and the content and language objectives. So the first one, and these are going to be also on this whole PowerPoint will be on the iDrive, and you can get a better look at them up close and personal. But the first one has the content objectives in the red and the language objectives in the blue. And they're not perfect. It's a good start. The attempt is there, and that is what we are celebrating, that the attempt is for those teachers. So on the content, they just have, I believe this is a first or a second grade class. They're studying coins. That's the focus of their lesson that day in math. And then on the other side, they're going to order and explain and record the, oh no, well, that's the one that goes with the number lines. I can't read the other one. But the second one, it was about number lines, and they're going to explain and record the points on a number line. So they're explaining, they're talking. Okay? So it could be that simple. And then the one in the middle we wanted to share with you because that's a kindergarten attempt at displaying objectives in the classroom. So they have a lot of visuals up there with those objectives. So this, because the objectives are for the students to know what they are responsible for learning on that day for that lesson. And then we have the one that's in Spanish, we really wanted to share with you because I was going to give a little mini lesson in Spanish to see who could tell me what that said. No, that was my poor attempt at humor. Okay, so that one that's in Spanish we wanted to share with you because this teacher has written it from the student's perspective. The translation is, I will learn how I will use a table to, I will use a hundreds table to count by 2, 5, 6, 8, 10. I think they meant to do it by twos because that five's out shouldn't be, that should have been a 4. Okay, so it's written in the kid's voice. So this is either a first or a second grade. So that's also something else that you might think about doing. You know, this is what I am going to be able to do at the end of the lesson today, or this is what I am going to be doing during the lesson. That's another way that you could look at these objectives. And I don't believe that there's any kind of policy in the district about how it's worded. It just needs to be up. So whatever makes it more meaningful for your students so that they will know exactly what the expectation is for them on that day. Okay, so then for today, we've already reviewed what we've gone through before. And the rest of the session, we're going to share some research information about how to explicitly and purposefully support developing reading comprehension. And the main focus of today's session is going to be on supporting the development of good vocabulary, academic vocabulary. And we will do that by orally sharing and discussing the sheltered instruction strategies that have been used in the classrooms. We've already done that. That goes with the first objective, the content objective. And then the second language objective goes with content objectives 2 and 3. We're going to read about, discuss, and use vocabulary strategies that are used in sheltered instruction. Okay? So this is a short little passage that I want all of you to read. And when you finish reading it, I want everyone that can answer at least one of these questions to stand up. So read it. And if you can answer one of these questions, what is fructation? Why should manacles fructate? And if you were a policymaker, would you support policies that encourage fructation? And then why or why not? If you can answer at least one of those questions, please stand. You may not Google. You cannot Google. The answers are in the passage. Put away your phones. Just one question. That's all. You don't have to answer all of them. Just one. Just one. Okay. And I heard several people say the answers are right there in the passage. Yes, they are. Okay. So what is fructation? Okay. And why should manacles fructate? Okay. Now, if you were a policymaker, would you support policies that encourage fructation? We already do. Okay. So why? Why would you support? Why, if you were a policymaker? Okay, that's right. Because and policymakers are increasingly paying more attention to the importance of fructation, right? Okay, everybody may sit down. We've just passed a passage that was developed for tax. No. Exactly. So that is exactly the point that we wanted to make with this passage. That's just gibberish. Rhonda and I made it up. Actually, I think John Seidlitz also used this in one of his presentations. But the point is that we could, in the last few reincarnations of the standardized test that we've subjected our students to, they could probably go back and answer all of those right there questions, just taking the lingo straight from the passages and be able to answer the questions. But not anymore, as we are facing the newest testing ramifications of in the state of Texas. So if I were to ask a question like this about this passage, could you compare the fructation process to the winemaking process in the Napa Valley used at whatever winery? Could you do that? You would have to know what? You would have to have a very clear understanding of what that process would be. You would have to have a very clear understanding of all of those key words in there that speak to that process. Okay. So let's see how we're going to be able to do that. No, it's all made up. It's all made up. I just equated it to winemaking in my mind, because I mean that just Okay. So before we get into this session today any deeper, I'm going to tell you right now what the research tells us doesn't work in developing the type of comprehension that we would need for our students to be successful with that type of text that has all of that complex technical lingo and very little contextual support that they could go in there and use. My favorite used to be use the context clues. Go back and reread it and use the context clues. Were there enough context clues in that passage? No. So that's one way that the passages in our new assessment are going to challenge our students, is they're going to be fewer, like right there, contextual support for the questions that they're being asked to answer. So one of the things that we know, the research tells us, that copying definitions out of a dictionary, that is not going to help improve their comprehension. Because especially when we ask them to look up 20 words at a time. So then it just becomes a mindless task. They have the word and they're just copying. They're just copying, and you stop and you ask them, okay, what does this word mean? What word? Okay? The writing sentences after they've looked up those 20 words, that is somewhat helpful, but it's not going to be as helpful as it could be, because what? Have they really mastered the meaning of those words after they've looked them up in the dictionary? Because in any standard dictionary, you pick it up and you look up a word, and most of the time the dictionary defines the word with the word itself, with the same word. So how is that going to help me? And then, of course, the context. It has never really been a very reliable source of learning word meanings. The research from as far back as 1988 tells us that students that use that clue had a 1 in 20 chance of learning the meaning of the word from the context. And then memorizing those lists of definitions. It's like the timetables. I like to tell this story. My father, from the time I was 2 years old until I finished high school, made me recite the timetables to him. And could I tell you the timetables like that quickly? No, I can't. I cannot do it. I have my own little tricks of how I remember, but I don't remember just, lightning fast. It's like a little while ago, I was trying to figure out if I had enough of the articles that I'm going to engage you with in just a few moments. And so I said, I know there's 4 at each table. That means there's going to be, and it was 9 times 6. The final equation I came down to is, well, what's 9 times 6? I didn't know that, but I know what 9 times 5 is. So I just got that one, and I added 9 to it, and then I figured, okay, I think I have enough. But as far as just immediately knowing what 9 times 6 is, no. And he practiced with me. That was our one-on-one time. I had to recite them by rote. But I didn't learn them. I did not learn them, okay? So what we do know, and I don't know if some of you have been around as long as I have, in the early 90s, I went to a conference, the International Reading Association conference, and there was a poster that was very popular during that time at all the conferences. And it said, to improve reading, all students must, and the big poster was like this, and it just started out in big letters, repeated over and over again, read, 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 read. And I was just in San Antonio at the Texas Association of Bilingual Educators Conference, and Stephen Krashen, with those of you that are in bilingual education will know him, he's one of the gurus in second language acquisition, and he gave one of the keynote addresses, and his whole entire keynote address was the best and most effective strategy to support the academic English of RLs is to do what? Read. Read. So the more they read independently, books that they enjoy, that they have self-selected, if they read every day, and it's not like you have to sit down and finish this chapter book, or you have to read the chapter, they have to self-select something that it keeps their interest engaged in the text. So that is one of the 2 most important things that we can do to improve reading comprehension. And to support what I just told you about reading, we have this research. So the percent of words, the most frequently heard words from adults talking to children is 95.6, but those rare words, those highly technical words, like fructation or whatever those other made-up words were, those kinds of words, they don't come up in conversation very much. So 9.9%. Adults talking to adults at a college level, social words, conversational, 93.9, rare words, 17.3. Even at that level, graduate school students speaking to each other. Primetime TV, adult TV, 94 and 22.7%. Look at the 2 lines in the middle that we have highlighted. Those rare words, where are they? In children's literature and in comic books. I don't know how many of you grew up in the 60s, early 70s, when comic books were still a very popular collector's item with young men. I had uncles that were just a few years older than me, and every time I went to their house, I left with a bundle of comic books that I would just put under my blouse and hope that nobody noticed, because that was the only type of literature that we could afford, the only kind of books. And they were very selfish about letting their little niece carry off Superman and Batman and Flash and the Green Lantern and all those guys home with them, because they had stacks and stacks of them. But if you stop and think, those of you that had experiences with that type of text, and it had now, and then of course the highest representation of rare words is in abstracts of scientific papers, which we all read every day, right? Okay. So the second most important way to improve reading comprehension is by evaluating vocabulary appropriately, so that we as teachers are teaching the most important words, and that we're using those instructional strategies that will help them learn those words, that it'll go into long-term memory. And we're not going to throw out the dictionaries, but we have to use those dictionaries very judiciously, very carefully. And when we teach a word, it's not about the dictionary definition, it's the characteristics, the attributes of that word, and we're going to give you some examples of that in just a second. Okay, so we're going to focus on the vocabulary because the research is telling us that there's a strong, very strong relationship that cannot be ignored that ties vocabulary knowledge and their reading comprehension. And all of that increases as they move up the grade levels. Why is vocabulary knowledge more important as they move up into middle school and high school? What happens to their text? More complex vocabulary, and more of it, and more of it. Okay? But those strategies and skills that they need to master that need to start as early as 3 and 4 years old. Now, we have no control over what happens to them before they come to us. But the gap that they come to us with, the children of welfare parents at the age of 3 and 4 years had about 168 words that they came, their oral language that they brought to the school with them. The children of professional parents had 1,116 words. And the teachers' kids, what do you think they brought to school? Probably triple that. Probably triple that, because we forced, I don't know about you guys, but I forced books down my kids' throat. And now they thank me for it. They hated it back then, but now they thank me for it. So, and the research is telling us that an estimated 70 to 80% of understanding text comes from understanding that vocabulary, understanding those key words like manacles. Okay, so that's all we need to do from there. But on the other hand, this is the other thing the research is telling us. Yes, we teach vocabulary in our schools, but of 4,469 minutes of reading instruction in half a year, the amount of time the teachers explicitly taught vocabulary, only 19 minutes. That's 0.4%. 0.4% throughout the United States. 1st through 12th grade. They've done studies. And Durkin. And then another researcher, Connie Jewell, found that 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers taught vocabulary for 1.67 minutes a day. Most often, there was 0 amount of time spent in explicitly and purposely teaching vocabulary. Okay, so that And we're going to show you what we mean by purposefully and explicitly. So the research also tells us that in order for us to close that gap for our students, what we need to do is that vocabulary instruction needs to be in place in some way, shape, or form daily. And that we give enough time to those key words, those technical words that exist in the content areas that we are responsible for them mastering. And that careful thought and planning is put into the selection of the strategies that are used to develop the mastery of those vocabulary. And so what we mean by complex are teaching word families, roots, suffixes, affixes, prefixes. I think this is a mistake in the research. Affixes are suffixes and prefixes and roots. I need to call those researchers, right? And then also that we also know that effective reading teachers infuse all reading lessons with vocabulary development. Okay. So out of all those hundreds of thousands of words that we process through our classrooms every day, how do we get started? Well, first of all, there's an understanding of the two big categories of words. Glossary words are the brick words. That means you're content specific. In math, it would be like addition, subtraction, hypotenuse, whatever, those kind of words. In science, there are the content specific words, temperature, life cycles, that kind of stuff. The mortar words are the words that if you look at the very back of your handout, the next to last handout, you have what the researchers are calling high utility words. They are academic words. It's a front and back page, and these are the most often used academic words. They're the mortar words that hold those content words together and give meaning to the text that they are using. So the list that you have, they are ordered in use, in highest use with number one. If they have a 1 after them, that means that that word is in the top number 1 use. It is most frequently used. And then it goes all the way down to 10. And so we made that copy for you because you're going to do an exercise with that in just a second. Okay. So this is just another way of looking at those brick and mortar words. The common words, the basic words, are conversational. So we've given you a list of conversational words, the mortar words that we've given you that great big list of, and then content-specific words. Amoeba, denouement for social studies, détente, hypotenuse, Jacksonians for social studies, morpheme, for English language arts, I can never say that one. The O word. And plebiscite, and that's a math word. Who's the mathematician? Sine? Okay. All right, and trapezoid. So this is just to give you an idea of those types of words, because what I'm going to have you do in a second, when you're selecting words, okay, so you're going to use this as your criteria in a little bit. I'm going to have you read one of the articles. You self-select whichever one you want to read. And then I have some dry erase markers. You're going to select 5 or 6 words that you would possibly directly and explicitly teach to your class, to your students, if this were a passage you would be using in your class. So this is your criteria for selecting no more than 5 or 6 words in a week. New words that are not common to oral language. So it can be a conversational word, but it may be something that doesn't normally come up in this level of conversation. Okay? This age group. High use words, that big list that I just gave you. This is the language of tests. This is the language of textbooks. This is the language of academia, of schools, that list that I gave you in the handout. So when you're selecting from the bolded words, or even the words that are not bolded in anything that you are presenting for the first time to your students, you need to look at this list and see if any of these words are in the text that you are using with them. Or it could be brick words, those content words. And they may know one word for it, but maybe we need to kick it up a notch and give it another higher level concept word. Abstract words, democracy. How do you describe democracy? Or, and that's a brick word. Or a mortar word such as reluctant. What is the definition for reluctant? That's pretty abstract. Okay? And subjective. Depends on the situation and the context. And then words that require background knowledge for concept development, like the brick word in math, variable. You can't just throw that and give them a definition of variable, but there's a whole lot of other background information that they need before they can appropriately use a variable. Can have control of that word. Multiple meaning words like round. Round can be a common conversational word. The ball is round. I like the red ball because it's round. But it can also be a brick word in math. You will round 26 to the nearest 10. So words that could be confusing in the context, the new context in which they're being used. And no more than 5 or 6. Because you're going to expend a lot of energy in preparing and in actually following through on these lessons. So you need to choose wisely. So I'm not going to go over this step by step, but all of the information on this slide, if you are using certain vocabulary instruction already in your classroom, I want you to go back to this slide and ask yourself, is the vocabulary strategy that I'm using in my classroom, is it meeting these requirements? Because this is what all the experts are telling us that needs to be in place for vocabulary instruction to be effective. The type of strategy. Okay, so in groups of 4, what you're going to do, you're going to read one of those articles, and I've placed dry erase markers on the tables so that, because we want to use these over and over again in our remaining presentations. Read with a partner. You don't have to do it by yourself. Select 3 brick words, 2 or 3 mortar words from the article, and in your group, after you've selected, then discuss why you chose those words. So right now you have, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I think you can just scan through there. Just scan. I know. Just scan. You don't have to read it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. It's okay if you didn't do 5 or 6. If you picked 1 or 2, just pick 1 or 2. So now turn to the other. I'm not going to have you get up and move around, but turn to someone at your table and pick one word from that you circled or identified. Explain why you chose that word and why you would use that specific word to spend an extended amount of time in your classroom teaching. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're the best judge of what your students need. And if you think they need that for you to spend that much time, the mortar words are just as important as the brick words.
Well, I spend all my time on my mortar words. Unfurl, we have to talk about what unfurl words we drawn. Yeah. Mire, we talk about that. When we talk about rain, we mention paradise. I can remember paradise we have.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. I know you're having good conversations, but I want to make sure you get home before it gets really dark. But I overheard the conversation over here at this table. Do you mind if I share? Okay. So they're talking about, I would spend more time on these words, but they're not brick words, they're mortar words. And so my response to him, and I jumped in the conversation, and they're both equally important. Who's the best judge of what your students need? You are. So having said, though, there has to be a balance. So you have to look at what your content objective is for what you're teaching, and then look at the words through that lens and say, for this lesson, the students absolutely must know that the bones in this poem have to do with fossils. So bone is not a very complex high-level word, but it is a content word that they will need to know what the connection is to how it's used in this poem. So that's a content word that I must teach them. Then the mortar words that you selected, unfurled, is used in one way in this poem, but in another context, in English language arts, in science, in social studies. In social studies, it's going to have an entirely different meaning. And that's part of the discussion that you have when you share these words with your students. So, okay. So once you have these words in mind, and you just need 1 or 2 right now, and let's say reluctant. I think reluctant was one of the words in the ecosystems article. So this is the conversation you might have in a small reading group or a whole class context. It depends on how many or who actually needs that type of interaction with this word. Why might a person be reluctant to eat a new food? Okay. Why might a child be reluctant to come to first grade? Okay. So have I given you a definition of that word, of what reluctant is? No. I've used it in meaningful context. So you ask them those questions before we even get to the definition stage. So that's part 1 of this extended instructional time that you have in your classroom. You have to have in your head the types of questions that you're going to ask about this particular word before you even start into the formal vocabulary. Okay. And one more thing before I move on. The last one, this is very important too. Anytime that you can build in some type of kinesthetic visual, a kinesthetic action. So if you were reluctant to touch a snake, how would you look? You know, and just put as much drama into it as you can. You know, one of the things that I've noticed, I've worked with teachers from pre-K through 12th grade. The higher up I go in the grade levels, the less they are, they're more self-conscious about being themselves and acting kind of goofy with their kids. elementary school level teachers, they'll dress up in hilarious, crazy outfits. They'll do and say crazy things. But for some reason, as we move up, then we become more sedate, more formal with our students. And I think that's a mistake. I mean, the more that we infuse our passion and do those role plays with our kids, the more that the instruction will be meaningful for them. So the more often that you can infuse that role plays. Okay.
So when you're talking about asking the questions, are you saying to ask those questions before you even define it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Did everyone hear that question? So what we're saying is, do we ask these students these questions? Do we engage them in this type of conversation before we even define it? And the answer is yes. Because what are we doing? We're providing some background knowledge. We are linking this unknown word to something familiar, to a familiar context, before we even begin that more formal process. So, at this point, I was going to ask you to come up with questions or statements for one of the words that you chose, but we're going to move on, okay? Because we keep this going. Okay. So then the next step is creating what we call super sentences with that word that indicate an understanding, not a definition, but an understanding of what that word means. So you could say, Lisa was reluctant to eat the beets and liver that her grandmother had cooked for her. That's a super sentence. That is a super sentence. And also, is there context in that sentence that helps support the understanding of what reluctant is? Absolutely. Will that help them better use the context of new and unfamiliar text when they come across words in unique, unknown text, like in the test? Okay. So how about the second sentence? My brother is reluctant. Is that a good super sentence? No, absolutely not. So what would you be reluctant to do? I would be reluctant to do what? Okay? So this whole process is before we even start formally giving a definition. I'm not going to have you write the super sentences. You get the idea. Okay? Okay, so now this, everybody's favorite, the Frere model. And we're engaging you using this graphic organizer because it's one of the things the district is already asking you to do. And a lot of you already use this model. But we're going to tweak it a little bit. So you see what we've done in the top corner where I have seen all over the district students copying definitions from a dictionary in that top quadrant. And what did we tell you what doesn't work? No. We need to have a working understanding. So we put definition in there, but it's something like what we did with the super sentence. What do you understand reluctant to be? Okay? It's something you really don't want to do. If you're reluctant about something, you really don't want to do that, or you really don't want to eat that, or you really don't. Okay? Someone's forcing you to do that. And then the super sentence, and then the examples and non-examples, you're going to see how it unfolds. With the word deteriorate. So let's say we have the word deteriorate. We use some visuals. How many of you have ever heard the word deteriorate? Raise your hand. Okay? So if you have never heard the word, and some of you may not have heard it, to help those that have never heard it, let's everyone together say the word. Deteriorate. Let's count out the syllables. Deteriorate. Okay? How many of you have an idea of what that might mean? Yes? What might it? Don't try to give me a teacher definition. Okay, stuff that just falls apart. Very good. Excellent. Anybody? Okay, so now you've qualified that stuff that falls apart, but it over time. Okay, so we'll move on with that. But we would have several of your students joining in and might even say, well, I agree with what you said, but I also think somebody else might have said over time. It just doesn't happen. Okay, so then let's look at the pictures for those of us that are still not understanding what deteriorate might mean. Deteriorate. I can't say that word. I should have picked an easier word to say. So when something is not new anymore, it's old and in worse shape than before. So let's look at the boat. The boat has deteriorated. It's not new anymore. It doesn't even really look like a boat anymore. It's in worse shape than it was when it was new. Let's look at the lighthouse. And we could ask questions about what happens to stuff that stands in water for a long time? What happens? It deteriorates. Why? Why? Why does it begin falling apart? It rots. Oh, yes, it rots.
Weathering and erosion.
Yes, weathering. I don't want teacher talk. Okay. Okay. So the salt water and the wind have deteriorated the lighthouse. So what's the kid-friendly definition that we want up there? To lose its new condition and become worse or worn out. But I like what you said. It rots. It falls apart. We have that. Okay? Let's see what's... Yes.
Well, I did the kid-friendly definitions. I was a parent of care child. But in science and social studies, when it comes to take the test, it's not going to fit.
Not.
It's the definition that the teacher presented. So therefore, I find myself giving, because I taught the kids with an example, I find myself giving tons of examples, to try to bring them to that point. But a lot of times I can't bring them to that point because I am giving them.
And that's what, remember when I shared some of that research earlier with you, is that then after they have some understanding of what that word might mean, then we can give them the dictionary and have them look it up and have that formal definition that they were required to reiterate on the test. Yeah, and there are some.
Develop that vocabulary, but in a week's time, yes, I agree with you. It's given lots of time to continue to develop the vocabulary. But in 1 week's time, you have this set of vocabulary. The next week, you have another set of vocabulary. So it's moving quickly for those that are language delayed.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
But if we do it this way, then they'll and then I'm going to give you something else in a little bit. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. But then remember, then you do have to bring that dictionary in at some point. But to give it to them cold, right at the very beginning, then they're already tuned off. So because they've made no connection to it, you've established no prior knowledge, you haven't given them something that they could hook onto for that understanding to go into long-term memory. Then they have to create the super sentence using that word. Okay. And then the next step is we still are continuing this discussion. And see, that's what I mean about it. It's a very lengthy, extended period of time. So you're not going to be able to do this with the 20 bold-faced or more words that are in the textbook or in the reading passage that you are using. You are going to have to be very selective about what words you use this with. And go through the questioning. Once again, what are some other things that deteriorate? And I practice on my my sophomore granddaughter and my 6th grade granddaughter. They spent the night with me Sunday. So they were my guinea pigs, and I went through this whole process with them. And we were right here, and we originally had the word diamond as something that does not deteriorate. And my granddaughter told me everything deteriorates. Everything, even diamonds. So it just takes longer. It just takes longer. So, and that's a good thing if that kind of stuff happens in your classroom, because you're having those types of higher level conversations. Critical thinking is taking place. So then the next step is, for the examples, instead of just having pictures here, which you could, then we could have synonyms. What are some other words that mean more or less the same thing? And then non-examples. What are some antonyms? And this is where my granddaughter started arguing with me about the diamond, so then I just took it out. Okay. So that's one process, using that FAIR model that you guys have already have in place, but just tweaking it a little bit. Okay? And then to go back, this isn't the only tool that we can use. The other thing is word analysis. Looking at suffixes, prefixes, and root words, because once we teach that and they have mastered the meaning of those pieces, then you've given them a tool for a lot of other words. You haven't taught them just that one word. Okay, so these are in your handout. Do the math. Who are my mathematicians here? These are the most common prefixes. So if you just teach an, re, in, and im, how much of a percentage that is that of all prefixes that are used in the English language? Vast. Over half. Over half, just with 3. That is going to give you a lot of power also, and help with those words that maybe that other process didn't help with. Okay? And we didn't give you a separate handout because we figured it was big enough so that you could see it on the slide. Okay? And then the suffixes. Look at that. S and ES, 31%. ED, 20%. ING, 14%. But they have to really master the understanding. They have to master. We can't just teach it one day and just move on because we're out of time. It has to be taught to mastery. And then the Greek and Latin roots, over 50% of all English words are derived from a Greek or a Latin root. Okay? So then once you've taught these, and this is what I would recommend that you do, and this wasn't my idea, these were some wonderful teachers that I worked with at Hayes, the 6th grade team at, at Chapa Middle School. They took these most common prefixes and suffixes, and they divided them up between 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And those 6th graders are not leaving until they have mastered just those 3. Now they add more, as you know, than those 3 as the year progresses, but those 6th grade teachers are making sure those 3 are mastered and they know how to apply them in any new and unique situations that they come up with, that they encounter. The 7th grade took the next set, and the 8th grade took the next set, and by the time they leave that middle school, which I may say received a national award as one of the most schools to watch in the nation. It was the only middle school in the state of Texas that received that award. So, and they have a huge L population, a huge population. So things like this, also another strategy that's going to give you more bang for your buck in the time that you spend directly and explicitly teaching this. So introduce them, build that word wall, and then the other little thing that they added. How many of you are familiar with the game Pictionary? Okay, love it. The kids, our kids love to draw. So as a bell ringer, I think you guys call it in this district, over there we called it warm up. As you're waiting for everybody to show up, they would select a prefix, a suffix, or a root from their affix wall, and they would draw something like Pictionary that depicted the meaning of that prefix or suffix or root. And then when the teacher came in the room, she'd randomly call on someone to come up on the board to do their drawing. So they practiced quickly, a quick practice of the meaning of those words. Okay? So we don't play enough games with our kids. So I feel like I've been running a marathon. Okay, so this is what we've given you in your tool belt. Speaking in complete sentences, what to say instead of I don't know, give one, get one, engaging students in content and language objectives so they know what the clear expectations. This is what I want you to know at the end of this lesson. And this is how we're going to do it. That's the language objective. And vocabulary development using that Frayer model and that word analysis strategy. Okay? The Frayer model, that takes a lot of time. So only 5 or 6 words. There are still other things that you are doing in your classroom to develop vocabulary, but what did the research tell us? You have to do something every day. Every day. Not the Frayer model doesn't need to be done every day, but could you easily do the affixes every day? Yes. And just remember how much of the words in the English language you're going to give them the power to control and master the meaning of just with that strategy. Just with that strategy. Okay. Thank you.